68, Vince Gill finally revealed the truth he never meant for the public to hear.
There were times where we could go to the hospital. I couldn't be there for the surgery, and that was tough. You know, it's just one thing after another, and
Vince Gill is known as one of country music's most respected voices. A Grammy-winning songwriter,
Vince Gill.
Vince Gill.
Vince Gill.
Vince Gill.
guitar virtuoso, and quiet legend behind songs that defined a generation. For years, fans believed they understood what happened to his wife Amy Grant. But he now admits the story the world was told was only the surface. And he was warned to never speak the truth aloud. The marriage no one really knew. People believed Vince Gill lived in a peaceful world with a steady marriage and a calm home, mirroring his songs. That belief collapsed the moment he finally broke his silence. People think they know our story. They don't, not even close. There were moments I didn't know if our life together would survive. There were moments I didn't know if she would, he recently admitted. Everything began changing the year Amy's health first started to falter in ways neither of them expected. Symptoms appeared without warning. One week she moved through life normally. The next week she felt exhausted, unsteady, or confused about simple things. These shifts created an uneasiness in their home. Vince noticed every small change. He noticed when she paused longer than usual before answering a question. He noticed when she gripped a counter for balance and then brushed it off. Each moment felt small, but the pattern frightened him. He remembered the first night when he stayed awake beside her because something felt wrong. She slept, and he watched her breathing with an intensity he had never experienced in his marriage. He said later, "I kept waiting for something to change. I just did not know what that something was." He had no name for what he feared. He only knew that fear existed. There were specific moments Vince never forgot. He woke one morning and found Amy sitting at the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. When he asked if something was wrong, she told him she felt off, but could not describe how. That word stayed with him because it sounded small but carried fear underneath it. Another night she tried to speak and lost her train of thought mid-sentence. She looked at him with frustration and embarrassment. He realized she was struggling more than she wanted to admit. Guilt became part of his emotional world. He constantly wondered if he had missed early signs. He questioned himself and replayed conversations, looking for clues he should have recognized sooner. He admitted, "I kept thinking, what if something happens again? What if I am not enough to stop it?" But these weren't even the most shocking and devastating parts. Vince would later admit the truth about what really happened to his wife. For a long time, fear kept him back from opening up. And this had its roots from the first time Vince Gill learned what it meant to lose someone while they were still alive. Childhood, family, and the tragedy of his brother. Vince Gill's early life in Norman, Oklahoma looked simple from the outside. Neighbors saw a boy who rode his bike, went to school, and returned home to parents who loved him. The Gill household held family dinners where everyone gathered around the table, and the atmosphere felt steady and predictable. The innocence of these early years made what came next even harder for Vince to understand. His father, J. Stanley Gill, carried the weight of being a federal judge, yet he had a passion for music that softened the sternness of his profession. The evenings often shifted from quiet conversations to unexpected jam sessions. His father often grabbed a guitar after dinner, and his rough voice would fill the living room. Vince would sit beside him with his own guitar and try to follow along. He was not confident yet, but he wanted to be part of it. It was here that his music career truly began to kick off. These moments also became the easiest way for the family to connect. They could just sit together and play, and it made the house feel close and safe. But the life Vince knew changed forever with one late-night phone call. Vince was only 11 years old when the phone rang, and everything inside the house froze. His parents answered and learned that his older half-brother Bob had been in a devastating car accident. Bob was the wild one in the family. He was the older brother who teased him, played with him, and made him feel seen. That version of Bob disappeared within seconds. Doctors said Bob was in a coma. Vince watched his father's face fall in a way he had never seen. He watched his mother cover her mouth as if she could push the fear back inside. Bob remained in the hospital for 3 long months. Vince sat in waiting rooms that smelled like disinfectant and sadness. He watched adults whisper and cry. When Bob finally woke, he was no longer the brother Vince remembered. Bob could not speak. He could not care for himself. Vince's parents tried to stay strong, but he heard the truth behind closed doors. He heard his mother crying through the walls. He heard his father breathing heavily in the dark when he thought no one else was awake. The house grew quieter after Bob returned home. The silence carried a heaviness Vince had never known. He began to feel guilt he could not express. He wondered why his brother had been in the car and he had not. He wondered if he could have stopped it by simply being there. No one told him these thoughts were normal. His father remained stoic, and that required Vince to carry his pain alone. He retreated into music because it was the only place where the weight of the world did not crush him. Bob lived in his damaged state for 25 years. In 1993, Bob died. That same year, Vince released Let There Be Peace on Earth. The song It Will Not Be the Same this year carried the grief he had held since childhood. Vince later admitted that the song takes him back to the hospital room every time he sings it. The trauma he carried defined the honesty in his songwriting and the vulnerability in his voice. It shaped the way he viewed suffering and the way he feared losing the people he loved. This early wound influenced every part of his adult life. It taught him that people could disappear without dying. It taught him to stay quiet about his own pain. It shaped the fear that later overwhelmed him when Amy's health began to falter. That childhood wound never healed. It followed Vince into adulthood and shaped every choice he made, including the career decisions many never understood. Early career, struggle, and turning down dire straits. By the late 1980s, Nashville cared more about radio hits than anything else. The city was filled with artists chasing the same sound and the same short-lived success. Vince Gill lived in that world but did not fit into it. People inside the music industry respected him. They admired his talent and trusted him in the studio. He worked as a sideman, a session player, and even took the lead in Pure Prairie League for a time. But none of it made him a household name. He was known by musicians, not by the public, and that created a different kind of pain. He had the respect everyone claimed to want, but it did not change the fact that he was struggling to build a career of his own. He recorded 2 solo albums with RCA, and critics praised them, but praise did not pay bills. The charts barely noticed him. Country radio passed over his songs for louder, flashier acts. His peers started landing big tours and television appearances. Some of them became headliners practically overnight. Vince watched this happen around him and tried not to let it break him, but he felt the strain. He wondered what he was doing wrong. There were nights he went home feeling like he could not catch a break no matter how hard he worked. Meanwhile, financial pressure grew. Bills stacked up and opportunities felt smaller. He took whatever gigs he could find, even when the pay barely covered travel costs. He questioned himself more than he ever admitted publicly. Everything changed when Mark Knopfler reached out. Dire Straits was one of the biggest rock bands in the world at the time. Their album, Brothers in Arms, filled arenas. Knopfler offered Vince a full-time position in the band. It was the kind of offer most musicians dreamed of receiving. It meant global success, large paychecks, packed stadiums, and a life that would elevate him out of struggle instantly. Vince later said that Knopfler epitomized everything I wanted, and he meant it. Vince nearly said yes. He admitted he almost accepted the offer out of pure desperation. The thought of stable income and recognition pulled at him. But he felt something else too. He felt a warning that if he joined Dire Straits, he would never return to the musician he was trying to become. He believed it would turn him into someone else. He finally said, "If I went down that road, I'd never come back. I wouldn't be me anymore." He turned the offer down. At first, it looked like one of the biggest mistakes of his life. His gigs became even smaller. His income dropped. He watched friends celebrate major milestones while he played opening slots or worked in the studio for extra cash. He wondered if he had ruined his only real chance. But something like a miracle would happen. And it all began when he released When I Call Your Name. Becoming a star. When I Call Your Name formed out of the emotions Vince rarely talked about. It carried the feeling of being left behind, the ache of waiting for something that might never come, and the fear that he was disappearing in a world that moved too fast. The heartbreak behind the song was real, and he understood the pain in every line because he had lived it. The moment the song reached listeners, something shifted. People connected to it immediately. They felt the quiet sadness in his voice and the honesty in the lyrics. Radio stations started playing it more often. Audiences grew bigger. When he performed the song live, crowds went quiet in a way he had never experienced before. The most beautiful moment came when the song won him a Grammy. The award made him feel recognized for the first time in his life. He stood on stage accepting it, and for a moment he did not know how to react. Part of him felt grateful. Another part felt overwhelmed. A quiet piece of him wondered if he deserved it after so many years of struggle and self-doubt. As the song climbed the charts, Vince became one of the most respected voices in country music. People admired him for his authenticity. During the height of the song's success, Vince continued to receive letters from fans. Many wrote about their own losses, their heartbreaks, and the loved ones they missed. He read stories from people who cried in their cars while listening to him. A few wrote that his song had helped them survive their darkest moments. The impact shocked him. He did not expect the song to reach people so deeply. It made him realize that his honesty had power, even when he doubted himself. Yet, even as his music soared, trouble began building around him. His personal life took turns that would test him far more than the music industry ever did. The Amy Grant scandal and its fallout. The shift began in 1993 when Vince met Amy Grant while filming a Christmas special. They had not gone looking for each other. They had not expected anything unusual to happen. But everyone on set noticed the same thing. Their connection was immediate and natural. It was not romantic at first. It was more like two people recognizing something familiar in each other without understanding why. Both Vince and Amy were married at the time. Vince was married to Janice Oliver, and Amy was married to Gary Chapman. They tried to remain respectful of those marriages. They kept their distance when they felt their emotions pulling closer. They told themselves that the growing friendship between them did not have to become anything more. But emotions do not always follow rules, and every time they crossed paths for another performance or collaboration, the connection deepened in ways both of them struggled to ignore. Fans and tabloids began noticing their chemistry long before Vince or Amy admitted anything privately. Magazines printed photographs of them talking backstage. Reporters wrote headlines that suggested affairs and betrayal. Even casual glances between them were analyzed. The pressure increased when Vince and Janice divorced in 1997. Amy and Gary separated in 1999. The timing looked suspicious to the public, and people who once supported both artists suddenly felt betrayed. Amy faced the harshest backlash. She received angry letters accusing her of destroying her family and abandoning her values. Radio stations refused to play her music. Longtime fans boycotted her concerts. She had built her career on faith and family, and many people felt she had violated the image they held of her. The pain of losing her fan base hit her deeply. She tried to hold herself together, but there were nights when she broke down under the weight of the judgment. Vince often held her during those nights, trying to calm her while feeling helpless at the same time. He watched her shake and cry over a world that had once loved her. Vince received his own share of criticism, but his pain stayed quieter. He did not talk about it often. He carried guilt over the collapse of his marriage and the hurt it caused. He knew people were whispering behind his back. Friends, peers, and even strangers questioned his decisions. He felt torn between public morality and private heartbreak. He believed he had done everything he could to save his first marriage. He believed Amy had tried the same with hers. He later summed it up by saying, "We weren't reckless, we were human." That sentence reflected the truth he lived through. They did not set out to damage anything. They simply fell in love in the middle of two already struggling marriages. In 2000, Vince and Amy married in his backyard. They chose a simple ceremony with only close family and a few friends. They did not want attention. They wanted peace. To them, the relationship had always been about survival and healing, not scandal. But rumors never completely disappeared. People who did not know them personally continued to judge them. What the public did not see was the emotional cost behind every accusation. They did not see the therapy sessions, the apologies, or the long nights when Vince and Amy sat in silence trying to piece together a new beginning. The experience forced Vince to understand what real loyalty demanded. He learned that love meant staying steady even when the world tried to tear everything apart. This understanding would become essential years later when Amy faced the health crises that nearly took her life. Joining the Eagles after Glenn Frey's death. In the years after Vince and Amy survived the worst of the public judgment, Vince's career continued to evolve in ways he never expected. He had always admired the Eagles. Their harmonies, their storytelling, and Glenn Frey's voice shaped the way he understood music. He covered their songs at tribute events. He sang "I Can't Tell You Why" in his own concerts because it spoke to him. He never imagined any of this would tie directly into his life. When Glenn Frey died in 2016, fans across the country and around the world believed the Eagles' story had ended. Glenn was one of the founders of the band and the voice behind many of their most famous songs. Don Henley, the band's drummer and co-lead vocalist, said the Eagles had lost their anchor. Vince agreed from a distance. Glenn had been the heart of the group from the beginning, and there was no replacing him. Then the call came. Irving Azoff, the longtime manager of the Eagles and one of the most influential figures in the music industry, reached out and asked Vince to join the band. Vince was stunned. He respected the Eagles too much to ever picture himself stepping into that space. His first instinct was disbelief. His second instinct was fear. Yet the words came out before he had time to question them. He said, "When do we leave?" What he meant was simple. He was asking when rehearsals would begin and when he needed to be there. After he hung up, the weight of what he had agreed to hit him all at once. The fear replaced the excitement almost immediately. He understood that this was an emotional responsibility. He would be singing songs that belonged to a man who could never sing them again. He owed something to Glenn's memory, Glenn's family, and every fan who still grieved him. Vince threw himself into preparation. He spent late nights learning every guitar part, every harmony, every transition. He studied recordings until he could anticipate every breath in the music. He pushed himself until he felt physically sick. The pressure reportedly triggered panic attacks before rehearsals. The air was thick with emotion. Thousands of fans who had grown up with the Eagles watched him with a mixture of grief and hope. The audience at Dodger Stadium responded with tears, cheers, and long ovations. Don Henley later said, "He knows how to be in a band." That validation mattered deeply to Vince because it came from people who knew Glenn best. Critics still questioned him. They asked why a country singer had been chosen. They accused the Eagles of becoming a tribute act. Vince refused to respond. His only goal was to honor Glenn in every performance he gave. But while Vince carried Glenn's legacy on stage, something heavier waited for him at home, something that would test him in ways fame never could. Near-death fears. In 2020, Vince and Amy went in for what they believed would be a routine medical visit. Vince's doctor finished his own evaluation and suggested that Amy should get checked as well. They went along with it because it seemed simple, but the change came fast. Tests led to more tests, and soon doctors found something neither of them expected. Amy had a rare congenital heart defect called partial anomalous pulmonary venous return. It required open-heart surgery. The room felt smaller when the doctor explained it. Vince stared at the wall because he could not look at Amy without showing his fear. The pandemic made everything harder. Hospital rules kept Vince away from her in the days leading up to surgery. He waited alone, hour after hour, unable to sit still. The silence around him reminded him of waiting rooms from his childhood, where bad news always felt one door away. When nurses finally allowed him inside, Amy was pale and unsteady. He held her hand and told her he would not leave. She later said, "He was there holding me up, never letting me feel alone." There were moments during the surgery when doctors were not certain how her body would respond. Vince learned this only after the fact, but the knowledge hit him hard. When Amy returned home to recover, the process took months. She struggled with fatigue and confusion. In July 2022, Amy went on a bike ride in Nashville. Vince, who was 65 at the time, was not with her. He got a phone call telling him she had crashed and was unconscious. His body reacted instantly. His hands shook. His chest tightened. He relived the same terror he had felt as a child when he heard about his brother's accident. He drove to the hospital with tears running down his face and no idea what he would find when he arrived. Amy had suffered a traumatic brain injury. She had been unconscious for several minutes. Doctors explained the complications: memory loss, balance problems, and pain that might last for months. They could not give a clear answer about her long-term recovery. Vince listened, barely able to stand. He watched her try to speak and forget the words halfway through a sentence. He watched her struggle to remember small things. Vince canceled all concerts. He stayed with her during therapy sessions, held her when her frustration broke into tears, and learned how to support her new needs. His song, "When My Amy Prays," took on a new meaning. It was no longer just a tribute to her faith. It became a reflection of his own fear and the hope he held on to every day. Late career, rumors, and writing his deepest truths. After Amy's accident, Vince Gill felt a growing urgency he could not fully explain. At 67, he became more focused and more driven than he had been in decades. He spent long hours writing songs, not for hits or awards, but because he felt stories building inside him that he needed to release. "I'm writing the best songs of my life now. They're not the ones that will top the charts. They're the ones that matter," he said, and he meant it. One example is "Forever Changed," a song he released in 2019. It dealt with childhood abuse. It was not his experience, but he wrote it with the kind of empathy that came from a lifetime of carrying pain. He started speaking more openly about hard subjects. He talked about regret, aging, faith, and mistakes he had made along the way. This honesty made fans feel closer to him, but it also stirred new questions. Rumors began circulating. People wondered if he was retiring. Some asked if he was sick. Others speculated about his marriage and whether the strain of the past years had created cracks. He decided to address everything directly. He said he was not retiring. He said he was not sick and his marriage with Amy was steady. The more he spoke, the more people realized he was moving into a different chapter of his life. He turned down offers that would have put him back on big stages because he did not want to chase anything anymore. But underneath his confidence was a layer of fear that did not go away. The experiences he had lived through with Amy changed him permanently. He no longer saw time the same way he once did. He often sat alone in his writing room and wondered if each new song might be the last one he ever finished. He felt the pressure of aging and the reality that his life had more years behind it than ahead. He looked at Amy and worried about her recovery more than he admitted publicly. Even small things made him nervous. If she seemed tired, he felt his stomach tighten. If she forgot something, he wondered whether it was normal aging or something returning from her brain injury. What Vince Gill finally revealed about what happened to his wife. Vince Gill waited years before he finally spoke the truth out loud. At 68, he said what he had carried alone through 2 medical crises that nearly took his wife from him. He had spoken publicly about her recovery, but he had never told anyone what happened behind the scenes. He never shared the warnings from doctors or the fear that settled into his life for years. When he finally opened up, he said the part he hid the longest was the truth that Amy's life had been on the line both times and that he had been told to prepare himself for the worst. During her open-heart surgery, Vince sat in a hallway waiting for news. Hours passed with no updates until a doctor finally pulled him aside. The doctor told him there was a real possibility Amy might not survive the operation. He told no one. He kept the fear inside because he did not want anyone panicking or expecting the worst before the surgery was over. He stayed quiet, prayed, and waited for someone to tell him whether his wife was alive. Every minute felt like a reminder of how quickly a life can change. When Amy survived the surgery, he felt relief, but it did not last. The long recovery revealed struggles no one outside the family knew about. She was exhausted, confused, and unsteady for months. Vince watched her carefully, studying every change in her expression, her memory, and her balance. He did not say it publicly, but the recovery frightened him almost as much as the surgery. He did not know what would return and what would not. He did not know what version of Amy he would end up with. He only knew he needed to stay close and keep her safe. Then came the bike accident in 2022. He stood beside her hospital bed while she fought to wake up, and he knew immediately that this second injury had done more damage than anyone realized. As she began her recovery, he noticed gaps in her memory that lasted weeks, then months. Some of the missing pieces frightened her. Some frightened him even more. One night during her recovery, Amy looked at him with confusion and asked, "Did I already tell you I love you today, or did I forget again?" The question broke him. He realized the woman he had known for decades was still there, but parts of her memory worked differently. He understood she was not gone, but she had changed. He accepted it, but it took time. He admitted he feared she would never fully return to the version of herself he had known. He feared he would watch her lose pieces of herself, one moment at a time. Vince finally said there was a moment when he thought about leaving music completely. He said he would have walked away from every stage and every tour without hesitation to care for her full time if that became necessary. When he finally told the truth, he said his greatest fear had never been death taking her. His greatest fear was that she would remain alive while pieces of her identity slipped away. He made a promise at her bedside that he had never spoken publicly. He said, "If she never comes back fully, I will love who she becomes." If you enjoyed, please make sure to click the cards on the screen now for more videos.